Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Altman Law New School Year IEP Preparation webinar. We're so excited to have you with us tonight to talk about preparing for the upcoming school year and how you can develop a new school year strategy to proactively address student needs. We're here tonight to talk a little bit about some strategies and some IEP preparation. And with us, we have two of our special education advocates who are experts in these types of things. We have with us Sarah Lotak and Melanie Roy. They can, give you a little wave, say hello. And my name is Crystal Ash. I am actually part of our special education due process team here at Altman Law. So I'm a little bit adjacently related, but still pretty much, right in step with new school year preparation and all of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. Just to give you a little bit of an overview of the purpose of this presentation, we're really looking tonight to give you the information that is going to help you become better prepared to start the school year off on the right foot to ensure that you and your student with a disability has the information necessary to advocate for appropriate special education programming. Emphasis there on appropriate, because oftentimes, especially as we make those big transitions, maybe from elementary school to middle school or from middle school to high school, you might have programming in place, but as our children grow and develop and they have new needs arise or things change, maybe you move districts, we want to make sure that not only do they have programming, but they have appropriate programming. So we've broken this presentation down into three main categories to address this more effectively. We're going to start off with a summary of the law, so looking into the IDEA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act to give you a strong understanding of the legal framework that supports special education programming in public schools and other federally funded programming. Then we'll move into considerations that you should keep in the back of your mind as you are starting a new school year or as things come up at the beginning of the school year, so that you can ask yourself some questions and ask your school team these questions to make sure that your child is set up for success. And then once we have a full understanding of, what we should be looking for and what the school year could look like, we're actually going to dive into some real life examples of some fake student scenarios that we've made using these considerations and things that we've seen at the start of school years to discuss situations that maybe you found yourself in or that you might find yourself in if your school year hasn't started yet, so that we can discuss what these considerations might look like in real life and how we might address them and some advice that we would give a client if they were going through these situations. So I'm going to kick it over to Melanie. She's going to get us started off talking about the IDEA.
So a question we often hear is, what is IDEA? The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, protects students on IEP plans to ensure they have access to a free and appropriate public education. And when you think about that, that sounds great, but who does it protect is what you have to ask yourself. And the IDEA protects students who are eligible and have disabilities between the ages of 3 and 21 who are participating in a federally funded education program, such as attending a public school. The big question to ask yourself too is, what does IDEA provide? Now, we talked a little bit about FAPE, or free and appropriate public education, so that students with disabilities are entitled to an education at no cost to parents that meets their individual needs. Such education needs to happen in the least restrictive environment, or the LRE, where the student can be educated with peers without disabilities as much as possible. And we want to make sure they're evaluated appropriately, that schools use fair, non-biased testing to identify disabilities and guide those services. Once they have all of that information, they can create an IEP, or Individualized Education Program, which is a legally binding plan developed by the IEP team, and the team includes the parents, that outlines goals, supports, services, and placements in order for the child to make progress. It is important for parental participation as equal decision makers to be included. And alongside all of this comes your rights, or your procedural safeguards to protect the rights of both the students and parents. And that can include processes like mediation and due process. In order to be eligible, your student must qualify under one of 13 to 14 disability categories. And when I say 13 to 14, there is one category area that in some areas is separated out. So visual impairment and blindness are sometimes two separate categories, and in other times are one category. And then what does all of this provide your student outside of the IEP? or within the IEP. It's related services such as speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling, transportation, assistive technology, and transition planning. Remember, this is an individualized plan. So it's based on the student's area of need and ensuring they can make progress and access the curriculum.
Great, so I'm going to talk about what Section 504 is. So Section 504 protects students with disabilities to ensure a free and appropriate public education, just like an IEP would, right? But who does it protect? That's different than a student who qualifies under one of those 13 or 14 categories. So Section 504 protects students with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, and it protects them from discrimination in their educational environment, any of those educational environments or programs that receive federal funding. So unlike a student with an IEP under IDEA, Section 504 is not special education, but instead it provides accommodations and supports for that student. So again, in order to be found eligible, that student has to have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. Some examples of those accommodations could be extended time, preferential seating, or behavioral supports.
So, as we look to discuss considerations that you should be thinking about at the beginning of the school year, all of these different factors that can impact a student with a disability, we've broken this down into 4 more specific categories so that we can really dig into the nuances of each factor. The first one that we're going to want to think about is placement. So, asking yourself, is my child starting a new school? Are they about to graduate from school? Is their upcoming placement appropriate? Then we think about their programming. So not necessarily, if they're in the AP program at the high school or if they're in the IB program, but their special education programming. Asking yourself, does my child have or do they need special education programming? And if they do already have special education programming, is it appropriate? Then that leads us to taking a look more closely at their needs. Summer is a big time for students to grow and change developmentally, right? Especially in those middle to younger ages. The difference between 12 and 13 can be huge for some kids, right? So over the summer, has my child's needs changed? Have they regressed or advanced over the summer due to things like extended school year or maybe the lack thereof? And does their current programming that they left off with at the end of last school year currently meet their needs, or have their needs changed so much that we're going to need to update it as we start the new school year? And then we'll also look at behavior. Just like with their needs changing, those really developmentally impactful years can also come with a change in behavior, especially for our children that are going through puberty, especially our high school students who are getting under a lot of stress as they grow up and become young people. So has my child started to exhibit new behaviors over the summer? Or if they haven't yet, are they at the age or will they be at the age throughout the school year where they might start to develop new behaviors? These are all the kinds of things that you want to think about and kind of have in the back of your mind as you start the new school year so that you're on the lookout for these changes and you're ready to take action with your IEP or 504 team to address them proactively.
So when you're diving into placement and you're trying to determine if it's an appropriate placement that is meeting your child's needs, there's a lot of areas to really look into within placement. So when we're thinking about placement, we're looking at the grade that your student is entering, the school that they're entering, whether they are special education or general education environments or a combination, and if that the amount of each is appropriate. If your child is entering a new school this year, you really want to make sure that there are certain considerations to have in place and things to pay attention to as your child is growing and developing. So if you have a child entering elementary school, it could be important to think about skills such as school readiness. That can include attention span, joint attention, play skills, and early academic skills. You also want to pay attention to effective communication of your child's wants and needs. Are they able to communicate if they need the bathroom, a drink of water, if they want a snack, or if they want to play with a particular peer or toy? And can they do so effectively in a way that ensures they're able to have those needs met? You also want to think about homeschool communications. What information do you need to know and what information do you want to know from the school day? that helps you to support the school and helps you to support your child as they're in this environment. You want to think about transportation. At this age range, many students are still making use of car seats, and some students with special needs require that car seat in order to get them from home to school. And those things can be included to the IEP as needed. And then lastly, as we're exiting and moving through elementary school, we want to make sure they've obtained their foundational academic skills, because that is the foundation that they are going to build on for the duration of their future schooling years. As we talk about middle school considerations, you want to pay attention to all of these things, but you really want to dig a little deeper too. You want to pay attention to social emotional support, such as self-advocacy, peer interactions and inclusion, and behavior supports. You want to pay attention to executive functioning needs. We now have students that maybe have multiple teachers, and they're going to be required to be taking notes and organizing their own materials. And really the academic needs are increasing. So we want to make sure that their ability to meet that demand is also increasing, or if not, that we're supporting them appropriately. Schedules could be rotating. They could have shorter class periods, or they could need a strategic placement for services, shifting maybe from a pull-out version of services to maybe a push-in model when appropriate, and making sure that you're noting those things. Additionally, because the academic demands are increasing, you want to pay attention to the need for assistive technology as well as correlated skill growth, and focus on that increased independence when able. And then when we transition to high school, the additional components include transition planning, which can include post-secondary education training, employment, independent living skills when appropriate. And it also puts more emphasis on the student's input when it comes to goals, vision, and dreams the student has for the future. You also want to be mindful of graduation versus certificate of completion and which track your student is on, and ensuring that that is the appropriate track. And then also additional considerations are academic and testing accommodations, such as SAT, ACT, and AP testing when appropriate. Really, if your child's placement is appropriate, great. If not, what can you do? You can reconvene the IEP team to review that data and to discuss what an appropriate placement would look like, to address your concerns, and to see what the team thinks.
You can keep going with programming if you'd like, Melanie.
Sure. So when we dive into programming, we really want to pay attention to suspected disability and eligibility determination. And we really want to make sure that if your child does have special education programming, an IEP in place, that it is appropriate. And if they need new services, that you're able to request that in writing. And the way to do that is to request an eligibility determination if they are not currently on special education programming. Additionally, if you are unsure if their programming is up to date, you have the right to review that programming, and you can update it annually, or if necessary, reconvene the team at any point to discuss progress, concerns, increased or new needs, any amendments or additional testing that's necessary, and data collection as well.
Okay, so let's talk about needs. So the first question we need to ask is, what were my child's needs over the last school year? And it's important to note that we're not just looking at academic needs, but we're looking at behavioral, physical, social, emotional, etc. Right? And the questions to ask here is, what were their needs last year? Are their needs currently the same as the previous year, or did they change? Are their needs currently met through programming? And how do those needs impact education, right? And depending on your answer to those questions, it may lead to needing to reconvene the team to look at their programming and make sure it's appropriate. Some signs of new needs include frustration, behavioral changes, drop in academic performance, school avoidance, right? So it's important to take data, your own data on those areas, to determine again if you need to reconvene with the team to look at new supports, new goals, etc. And another area of concern that we see a lot is regression or even progress over the summer, which may also lead to the need to change the plan, right? So we want to take that data from the summer and we want to bring that to the school year to determine if things need to change based on that. And it's important to know when to request a review and what changes may help. So we want to give the student a little bit of time in the beginning of the school year to get adjusted, right? To then look at the data and determine if there are new needs and if we need to reconvene to determine additional supports. Okay, now let's talk about behaviors. So, does my child have behavioral needs? And is this behavior or these behaviors impacting their learning or the learning of others? And are the current supports in place for behaviors proactive and appropriate? So there are different things that a school can put into place to support a student's behavioral needs, right? And a new year or a new teacher, new class, et cetera, new environment, sometimes a new school, depending where they are, can trigger new behaviors, right? So it's important to request additional assessments if there are a pattern of behaviors that are impacting their education or, again, the education of others. And you can request that through a functional behavioral assessment. Occasionally, we can put in positive behavior supports embedded within the IEP itself. And a functional behavioral assessment may lead to a formal behavior intervention plan. Some signs that a reevaluation regarding behavior is needed is an increase in frequency or intensity of a behavior. Again, that the behavior interferes with learning. If there are new behaviors that were not previously addressed through the IEP or behavior intervention plan, and if you're getting more discipline referrals. So that would prompt the need to request more support there. And then to get a reevaluation, including an FBA, that functional behavioral assessment, it is important to request that in writing. Document your concerns, right? Use new data to update the plan. So whether that's updating the current behavior intervention plan or reconvening to request an FBA, leading to the creation of a behavior intervention plan.
So now that we've gone over, some different scenarios and some considerations and questions that we should be keeping in the back of our mind, let's take a look at a case review, or several case reviews actually, of what this really would look like in person in an actual scenario. Excuse me. And assuming that all of these students have programming unless stated otherwise, we're going to go ahead and walk through each of these scenarios for a case review of sorts so that we can see and discuss and really dig into what might happen and what we might recommend if you were to find yourself in this type of situation. So starting in the bottom left corner here, in that box all by itself, our first scenario, we have a student who is set to graduate at the end of the upcoming school year. This student cannot demonstrate high school level academic skills despite having documented cognitive abilities to do so. What should I do to be prepared for this school year? Sarah and Melanie, would you like to, give some insight, discuss a little bit what your recommendations might be if, this type of a case came across your desk?
Sure. So when I hear that a student has the cognitive ability, but either can't demonstrate or is not able to perform academically at the level originally expected for typical students, the first thing I want to look at is all of the data. I want to look at the most recent standardized testing, if it was recently done, and if not, I want updated testing so I can ascertain where the student is and where their areas of need still are, especially when I'm talking about, they're graduating at the end of this school year. We've got a short period of time to give them all of the skills that they need in order to obtain that degree, if they are diploma track, which it sounds like they are because they're preparing to graduate. Ruling out that there's an additional disability that's impacting the student's ability to make progress, I would want to ensure that the goals and expectations are appropriate and individualized for that student. And I would really be paying close attention to progress monitoring to ensure that they're able to meet the expectations for themselves quickly. A frank conversation with the school needs to happen to make sure that those needs are met. And what happens if the student is unable to meet those expectations.
Sarah,
Sarah,
did
what
you
do you
have?
think?
Yeah.
Sorry, it was muted. I also want to add that it's so important, especially as a student's in high school and is inching towards graduation, right, that we're proactive. So if there's concerns early on, to really get on top of those concerns early, constantly look at progress and data throughout their high school career. So starting freshman year as they move on to senior year, to make sure that we're not missing that such an imperative time, right? So that we're not meeting at the end where the student's going to be a senior and now we had data from 4 years where maybe they weren't provided the appropriate programming or they weren't making the gains that they should have been.
Absolutely. And another thing too, especially parents, that you are the expert in your student, and we can consider some environmental factors here as well, especially like Melanie said, if we're starting to rule out some of these special education related issues like no additional disability, or, it's not a programming issue, you're the expert in your student and what they go through every day and their environment. Were there any additional environmental factors? Did you recently move? Was there, some sort of trauma maybe that affected your child, a death in the family, something like that? Is there something maybe social, emotional, or environmental impacting them that maybe it's not necessarily a skill issue, but rather some sort of hurdle that they need to overcome that our typical special education assessments and things like that wouldn't actually pick up? All different kinds of factors, that we can look at from many different angles when we're seeing a student, and especially if you have been, proactive and looking for signs their whole high school career, and you've gone through the battery of testing and we're still bumping up against this problem. It might be time to look a little bit bigger and kind of step out of that special education bubble and see maybe what else could be impacting a student that's not necessarily related to their disability. Our second case study is going to be the first one in that row on the top right. This student has performed very poorly in the previous year academically, and this summer has begun to demonstrate signs of depression, social withdrawal, and anger. What should I be prepared to do this school year?
So I think with this student, like our previous case, I would, since we're starting a new school year, wait some time and gather data, right? We want to make sure, again, when that student transition, we give them enough time to get acclimated to their new environment, new classroom, if they're in a new school, et cetera. We want to see how that student acclimates and does in the beginning of that school year. And then if necessary, we will want to request additional evaluations to hone in on the emotional and behavioral side of things that it seems like this student is struggling with, and how that impacts their education overall. And then obviously through that eligibility and evaluation process, if they're found eligible in those areas, we want to make sure that the appropriate supports end up in the IEP for that student.
And when I hear that a student is demonstrating new signs of depression, social withdrawal, and anger, first I want to recognize that counseling services should be available to all students, regardless of special education status. So you don't have to wait for that piece. You can communicate with the school up front, let them know about your concerns, and get the ball rolling on some support there. One, because the student's going to build rapport with that staff and start to build rapport before they're in crisis and hopefully prevent them from being in crisis. And two, if they do become in crisis, they now have someone that they trust who they're able to help walk them through that. In the meantime, too, I personally would recommend looking into an expert opinion. Sometimes these needs are demonstrating an additional disability, and I would want to connect potentially with outside supports as well to make sure that you have a full picture of the student's needs, and they can help you to communicate your concerns to the school as well once the school has some data.
Yeah, and this is a great example of how, your IEP team or your team that supports your student is not necessarily contained just to those who are in the school, and then also, parents or other supportive members, guardians of the child, things like that. Your clinician, if this may be clinical depression that you're seeking a diagnosis for or other expert opinion, anyone who is knowledgeable about the child and can contribute meaningfully to the IEP and other special education decisions belongs at the IEP table. And so you can bring in those outside voices and widen that sphere to the benefit of your student. And this is a great example of when that might be necessary, like Melanie said, to go out and seek those additional voices to make sure that you're really understanding everything that's going on with the student. Our third one, just going right down to the next box underneath, our student is entering first grade and cannot identify or write letters and numbers. What should I do to be prepared this school year?
All right, well, when I hear they're entering first grade, but they cannot identify their letters and numbers, the first thought is about remediation. I want to make sure that they have a solid foundation and that they're able to access the curriculum. And this delay in having this skill could really impact them, and the gap between themselves and their peers could grow. So I would really want to make sure that, like I said, they have access to the curriculum and that they can demonstrate their knowledge. And that, we're not preventing a large gap in their ability to demonstrate that knowledge and access the curriculum.
Right. And I also want to add here that it's important to remember that an IEP is individualized for a student, right? So the goals and where they currently at are based on present levels and progress. And we want to make sure that we're meeting them where they are at, right? So that might not necessarily be grade level for certain areas, right? We want to meet them where they are, and we want to make sure their goals are appropriate for them. And ideally, we hope that they're making meaningful progress and that we're closing the gap from those grade level standards.
Also,
Another thing, I think we had the same idea.
Yeah, I bet. Is it about writing their letters
and
numbers?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So when I see too that a student is unable to write their letters and numbers, not just identify them, I start to wonder if maybe there's OT or fine motor concerns. So I want to see if, first of all, the school is also seeing that area of need, and then not waiting and seeing. At this point, if they're unable to demonstrate this knowledge, I really want to assess and figure out appropriate remediation next steps. And that might look like fine motor supports for the child or direct instruction from an occupational therapist.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Our third student, again, going just right down to the next box below, our third student has been on an IFSP, which for those of you who may not know, this is an individualized family service plan. It is an early childhood special education, early intervention plan that are given to students from birth to age 3. So just for a little bit of context there. So our student has been on their individualized family service plan, their ISFP, until age 3. They had been on it, and then they are now entering kindergarten, but they have no updated IEP testing, and they have no special education programming as they enter into kindergarten. What should I do to be prepared this school year?
Right. So in this case, where the student was in the early intervention system and received an individualized family service plan until age 3, when they're entering school, right? So whether that's early childhood special education through preschool or kindergarten, and there's still suspected disability, right, under IDEA's 13 or 14 categories, we want to make sure we're reaching out to the school team, right? So the child study team or special education director to request special education eligibility evaluations in writing. And so that there's a plan in place for them to be evaluated and then potentially lead to eligibility for an IEP. If those evaluations do not determine that the student needs an IEP, but there's still some support that's needed, we can look through implementing some accommodations through a 504 plan for that student, depending on their disability and how it impacts them.
And keep in mind too, students grow and change a lot between age 3 and age 5, starting kindergarten. So it is possible that your student has made enough gains compared to the skill areas focused on the IFSP that they won't qualify for an IEP, but you really want to test if there's still areas of suspected disability or skill deficits to make sure you're making an informed decision there.
Keyword individualized, right? It's based on their individual needs, and their needs are going to change, like we talked about. So it's just something to keep in mind that programming once does not always mean programming forever. And what can support those needs is going to change throughout their schooling years. Our fifth and final student, that 3 times threw me off. This student was suspended 3 times during the previous school year and spent the summer hanging out with quote unquote problematic students who also tend to get disciplined often. The student is autistic and has struggled with self-regulation for many years. What should I do to be prepared this school year?
Sure. So if the student was suspended 3 times last year and doesn't already have a behavior intervention planned, I would prompt the need for a functional behavioral assessment through the school, right? And it needs to be done to have some positive behavior supports and a plan in place to hopefully reduce any behaviors and also overall to reduce any discipline, right, through suspension or what have you. I also want to note here that it's so important to have communication, and this is for all of these cases, right? We want to communicate with the school. This is a collaborative measure. We're all on the same team for our student or our child, and we want to make sure we keep that communication going. So anytime there's a concern, whether it happened over the summer and it may impact their school year, or whether we're in the nitty-gritty of that school year and there are issues arising, or we're seeing additional needs, you want to make sure that you are documenting those in writing and communicating with the school-based team consistently.
And when I hear that there's an autistic student that struggles with self-regulation and is maybe hanging out with the wrong crowd, I really think about things like pragmatic language and social skill development. This student may not fully understand the peer relationships that they're in or the implications of their behaviors. So I'd want to make sure that there's updated data and observation at minimum and testing from an SLP and school therapist on that social communication and pragmatic piece, and also tailor programming to those needs if those supports are already in place. Also, if the student was suspended 3 times in the previous school year and those days equal to 10 or more days of suspension, I'd be really looking at the behavioral side of things and requesting an MDR or a manifestation determination review to see if those suspensions are because of a manifestation of the disability, and ensure that, you know, any punishment is educational and not just punitive.
And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with our previous student, where parents, you are the expert in your child, right? So, two things to really keep in mind is behavior doesn't come out of nowhere. And if it doesn't sound like your child, right? If it doesn't, fit with who you know them to be or who they are growing up to be hanging out with these quote unquote problematic students or to be disciplined or suspended, chances are that's an indicator that there is a gap in programming or some sort of need is not being met. Rely on your instincts as the expert of your child, as being their parent or guardian, the person who knows this student the best. And when your gut instinct is telling you that something might be off and you might need to look into that further or push for something to be investigated or assessed or anything like that, listen to your gut and pursue that. Because if it doesn't sound like your child, maybe they don't know what's going on. Maybe there's a new need that's arisen. Maybe there's something that you don't know about. And the only way that you're going to be able to really figure out if their needs are being met, if their programming is appropriate, if they're being disciplined punitively or not, like Melanie said, is to ask questions and to collaborate with your IEP team and your school team to make sure that everyone has a full understanding of your student and what they're going through right now and where these behaviors or other factors may be coming from. All right, so we're going to go ahead and open up the floor for a Q&A. So you guys are going to get to see the right side of my face for a couple minutes as I pull up our Q&A questions on my other screen over here. So I see we have been active in the chat while we've been talking. So I see, I'm just going to work, from top to bottom as I see them coming in. But I see a question from Fran. Fran says, the school is telling me it's too early to do an FBA. What do I do? Sarah, Melanie, think on that for a second. What would you recommend if we're getting some pushback from a school team? They're saying, maybe this is a younger child, maybe, early elementary, that kind of thing. And they're saying it's too soon to do that. We don't do that until the child is older, that kind of a thing. What would you recommend in this type of situation?
So for me, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to document that request in writing. I'm going to put in writing that I'm requesting an FBA. And if the school calls to tell me it's too early, I'm going to ask them to put that refusal in writing as well. If you are requesting an evaluation for your child, which you have every right to do, and the school is saying no, they have to give you a reason for no. And sometimes their reasons are valid. It's too early in the school year and they need to gather more data and let your child adjust. Or maybe there's a big transition coming, or maybe they've already started observations, not an FBA, but that they want to report that information to you first rather than waiting for an FBA to be completed. And sometimes the reasons are just, there isn't a reason, right? So you want to be able to gain that insight. And the best way to do that is to document in writing and ask for the decision in writing as well. So if they call you and give you an answer, say, thank you, please put that in writing.
Absolutely. Everything in writing. And Data drives decisions in special education. So especially if they are declining to collect more data, that's a decision that you're going to want in writing in case there may be escalated steps that you may have to pursue if this is truly a need that is going to be unfulfilled because an FBA is being declined at this point. All right, our second question comes from Mark and Miri. Does my son qualify for/benefit from an IEP? Given past physical frustration would become physical when he could not communicate, and current lack of class participation, he draws all day, despite the teacher's advice that IEPs are only for quote unquote severe cases.
So let me jump in here. So if you have concerns, and it sounds like there are some concerns that are impacting his education, I would ask in writing for special education eligibility evaluations to be completed, right? And you're going to meet with the team. You're going to determine what evaluations to do to hone in on the potential disability and the potential areas of need. If the school refuses to evaluate, you would again want that in writing, right? So you would want that documented in a PWN, a prior written notice, so that you have that in your file, right, to refer to if needed. If they do decide to evaluate and they agree to that, you would then meet for eligibility, and it would be determined through the data whether your student is found eligible or not. Regardless, obviously, if the ultimate goal is to get an IEP because there is educational impact, then we hope that that eligibility leads to the creation of an IEP. But there's also opportunities to have conversations with teachers too in the interim. So how can we support my student while we're doing these evaluations? Because evaluations take time, right? So depending on the state, it could take 60, 90 days to complete those. And we don't want to waste that time because that's important educational time for your son. So we want to make sure that the teacher is also putting in some extra supports in place in the classroom and they know your concerns. So again, make sure everything's in writing, it's documented, and I would request the eligibility evaluations.
And the IDEA also does provide safeguards to protect the rights of students and parents with disabilities. And one of those is called Child Find, where once schools are aware of potential for disability, either through observation of the student, so, if they are observing that he becomes physical because he can't communicate, and that might indicate, or because you have explicitly said, I think that my son may have disability that impacts his education. Once they are aware of it, they do then have the responsibility to pursue eligibility testing and, seeing that through to make sure that they are not excluding a child who may have disability and not programming for them. So if you're getting any pushback whatsoever from requesting, if you're, getting just flat out, no, we don't do that here or anything like that, that is something that you can fall back on, that you do have those procedural safeguards in place that, the school is held to child find and that you can exercise your rights as a parent of a student with a disability in situations like that.
And I just want to speak a little bit about this concept of IEPs are only for severe cases. IEPs are for individuals who qualify that require accommodations and modifications in order to access the general education curriculum and make progress. So regardless of the severity of the disability, if they require modifications and accommodations to make progress and access the curriculum, then they will qualify for an IEP. Right? So this isn't just for kids who are most visibly disabled or who are most visually impacting from the teacher's perspective. It's for students who have a demonstrated need. So while we can't say whether or not your child would qualify or benefit, we can say it sounds like you have a suspected area of concern and you should be following up on that concern with the school in writing.
Yep, and that's for the data to decide too. That's why there are these types of protections in place. It's not for the teacher to advise that they're only for severe cases and that your student doesn't qualify. It's for the data to decide and indicate eligibility or not. Our next question, I see another question from Fran as I continue to scroll. So thank you, Fran, for being so active. What if my annual, And so for those maybe who are younger, have younger children, or are just entering the IEP space for the first time, your IEP or your 504 would need to be updated annually. A lot of schools may call this the annual or the annual review. So it seems that Fran has abbreviated this to annual. So what if my annual is in November, but I have concerns about my IEP now? Great question. Like we said in the presentation a little bit earlier, you always have the right, this is one of those procedural safeguards, to request a reconvene of the IEP team. So if you've got concerns, we can't say it enough, document it in writing, email your school team, send a letter to your school team, that kind of a thing. Document in writing your new concerns. And if they, are really presenting new challenges, you feel that your students' programming isn't sufficient, and it's August now and they're really going to start to regress between now and November, request again in writing a reconvene of the IEP team to address these issues. Reconvening the IEP team may then lead to more data collection, more assessments, that kind of thing, but reconvening the IEP team to talk about these concerns that you have is always the first step.
Right. And you can also ask for some data to be taken on a specific concern, right? So if you know that there's been behavioral concerns, maybe transitioning from the summer to school, and you want to see if those behaviors are still happening and potentially impacting the education of your child, you can ask for some data to be taken prior to reconvening. And then obviously that data can be used to have meaningful conversations during that reconvene.
We have another question. My kid is 8 and this is their first IEP. What types of things should I look out for?
All suspected areas of disability and that those needs are assessed. So you have data to look at to determine if there is, in fact, an eligibility for special education. You want to collaborate with the school team and remember that you're an expert on your child. So if you have concerns, you want to voice them, you want to listen proactively to what they're saying, and you want to make sure that all areas of need are addressed. And if they aren't, go ahead, Crystal.
I was just going to say, assuming that because this is their first IEP, this may also be their first set of programming. But if it's not and you did have an IFSP, you can also refer back to that data, pull those personnel in as you move forward with your new school team to make sure that, again, that historical data, that long-term understanding of the child is taken into consideration. Needs change, like we said, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still look at and analyze where they came from versus where they are now.
Right. And we're going to continue to say that data is your best friend, right? And that data is everything. So disciplinary reports, behavior write-ups, grades, progress, benchmarks, right? All of these things help with making decisions, and also in conjunction with that evaluation data.
No data is too small.
Right.
I mean, even down to look at our example in the last one, can't identify or write, right? If we're having a hard time physically writing something, a handwriting sheet, some sort of classwork sample, no data is too small when it comes to making sure that a student's disability and the impact that it has on their education is fully represented and considered, especially when you are looking to develop an IEP for the first time. Really, the biggest thing to look out for is to make sure that the team understands and the assessments that are in place for eligibility capture that full scope of how their disability impacts their education, and then what accommodations then are needed to support that. Our next question comes from Christy. Christy says, how long does it take to develop a 504 plan, and what does it involve in regards to paperwork? So there are.
Go ahead, Crystal.
We're all doing the math inside our heads right now. So there are timelines for eligibility. It's going to depend on if you are newly eligible or if you are revising a 504. I would assume by develop, you mean you don't have one yet and you're looking to get one. But once the evaluation process is triggered, schools typically have 30 to 45 days to actually complete the evaluation process. Within that, they have to convene the IEP team or 504 team to acknowledge the fact that there was a child find issue or a disability presented. They need to gather the assessments and then make a determination. Then once the determination is made, typically there is another 30, 45-day window, depending on your state, where they have to actually write up the plan and implement it. The plan should always be implemented immediately, as soon as possible, but they do have a little bit of leeway. For example, if this timeline backs up to winter break, right? If it's supposed to be implemented immediately, but you've backed up to winter break, now you're not in compliance. So they build in a little bit of a buffer with those federal guidelines, to make sure that, everything stays smooth and runs properly. So typically you're looking at about 2 months, depending on how fast your school team is. I wouldn't say any less than a month, just because assessment does take a while if we're doing a comprehensive assessment. But it shouldn't drag on for like 6 months. It shouldn't take a whole school year for this to happen.
And I want to add to that. Sorry. I just want to say that the evaluation process for a 504 is not as formal as the evaluation process for an IEP, right? So it typically does not take as long to get a 504 in place than it does an IEP, because that evaluation process is much more robust for an IEP.
That is true. It does depend on if you're going for, a long-term disability, like an intellectual disability, because you can get a 504 for something as simple as a broken arm, right? A short-term disability that you just need simple modifications and accommodations for. So that's a good point, Sarah, that it really is going to vary depending on the issue that you're facing in the school system.
And if it's a complex medical need, for example, your child is newly diagnosed with diabetes, and they need medication management immediately, as long as you have documentation from a medical provider with those orders, you can get a 504 in place rather quickly. I mean, you're going to work with the district, you're going to partner with them. Each district has a little bit of different paperwork when it comes to onboarding for a full special education evaluation. But if you are just looking for accommodations that are noted and you're in agreement with the school, it can definitely happen faster. So it doesn't fully answer your question of how long it takes to develop and how much paperwork there is, but it is highly individualized.
Yep.
And I urge you, if you have these kinds of questions, to reach out to a special education administrator or a general education administrator, such as a principal or vice principal at your school, and ask them for specifics for your district as well. And if you have further concerns, give us a call.
Yeah, and it just the bottom line though is shouldn't take like 6 months to a year. It should,
for sure.
If your school is dragging their feet, if you are pushing for it and you keep getting pushed back, give us a call, because that's not something that typically should happen, especially like Melanie said, if you do have documentation in place, or like I said, if it's a short-term disability you're looking for, like a broken arm or something like that, this is not typically something that you would see drag out forever and ever and ever. We have another post from Mark and Miri. Last year, we had our son in kinder, and he was experiencing difficulty following and participating in class and reading with the class. Although we did read with him at home, he was reading slowly but surely. Along some of the behaviors, he was scratching in recess. They had called us in for a meeting, and we had more than 12 people meeting with us. We tried to work with them and then decided to take him out and homeschool. This year we have him in first grade, and we're going step by step. We've already applied for an IEP, and we're waiting to see if they can help him with special help in class, like a one-on-one. What do you suggest we do else? I suggest you give us a call. It sounds like you have a pretty tough situation that you're working with, especially given the fact that he had a lot of difficulty last year, to the point where you had to pull him out of school, and there might be, some hurdles yet ahead of you. This is something that we do offer as a service from our special education advocacy team, is helping parents navigate situations within their school district that they, may be a little bit out of their depth in, that they may need an expert opinion, like we recommended earlier, to have somebody come in and make sure, that we just write the course and have the appropriate things put in place, so that nothing is left out. Melanie or Sarah, did you have anything specific other than that it sounds like they
No,
need a consult?
I mean, it
Document
seems,
everything.
yeah.
Definitely sounds like you need a consult, but document everything and make sure to articulate all your areas of concern. So since your student is already, underway for evaluation, you want to make sure they're being evaluated in all areas of concern.
Yes.
So on here, you listed memory and attention span, you listed reading, you listed behavioral needs. It sounds like there were some social emotional needs as well, because the student is withdrawn and drawing during class. And there might be some attentional concerns as well. Those are just the ones that I noted from what you said. It's possible there are more too. So you really want to pay attention to all areas of need that could impact their educational access.
Our next one comes from Jay Matash. Sorry if I butchered your name. Sarah, this might be a good one for you. I'm clocking New Jersey in there, I think. If general education students are being offered tutoring through the school as part of the NJ MTSS, and for those who may not know, MTSS is a multi-tiered system of support. This is typically a structure that is available to all students, not just special education students. It's usually a school or district-wide effort. So if general education students are being offered tutoring through the school as part of the NJ and MTSS, excuse me, to help them catch up if they have fallen behind or are struggling, does the school also have to offer that same tutoring to special education students? I was told special education students are not eligible because they already have an IEP that provides the support they need. Is this permissible under the law? So
Yeah,
I'd like to
so
preface that we are not attorneys, so we cannot give
right.
legal advice, but
No,
we
and this is
can
not
speak to
legal
special
advice.
education.
But typically when a student has an IEP, that IEP should cover all the areas that tutoring would have covered anyway through that MTSS, right? So, and I also want to note that MTSS is never a replacement for special education, right? So even if that student is getting MTSS and maybe is not identified as a student who has a disability and potentially needs an IEP, that should never stop a student from being evaluated. So again, that student who has an IEP, their needs should be documented within the IEP. So whatever the general education students are getting through the MTSS, that student should be able to get through their IEP if that's what they need, right? So they're two separate things, but they can cover the same content, the same support, right? If it's based on the same need, if that makes sense.
And I think too, this is another thing where you may want to escalate it to your district personnel, because it does depend on, if this is a discrimination issue, or if it is, like Sarah said, they should have these supports anyway, and if they don't, then we need to develop more robust programming. So it's a little bit hard for us to say just based on the little context you're able to provide us in a comment. But if you have serious concerns that it is a discrimination issue rather than just a teacher misunderstanding or speaking out of turn, I would go to your district personnel, your school board, or your special education director, or your MTSS director at your district office, and just clarify with them, because that will be the most direct route, is to ask the people in charge who should have the answers, and then again in writing, so that if they deny it and it really is some sort of discrimination issue within your district, then you would have the data to support if you need to pursue that any further. Our next question comes from Melissa. Melissa asks if we can share a list of possible services that a district could or should provide. She caught OT, occupational therapy, PT, physical therapy, and counseling earlier. And that was all we had already mentioned.
I mean, in no way is this an exhaustive list, because there are so many options, but I can absolutely line out more. And I want to be cautious of could or should provide. It's all individualized based on a demonstrated need and that individual need. So just because a child has a disability doesn't mean that they qualify for all of these or require all of these supports. But some off the top of my head: TVI, teacher for the visually impaired. This can be for students with physical inability to see, or with cortical visual impairment or processing needs, unable to perceive information that way. O&M, orientation and mobility. Similarly for the same students, but it has to do with place and space, making sure that the areas that they're needing to mobilize through are appropriate. Speech and language services for students with articulation, communication, or social pragmatic needs. And then there are so many more needs that fall under speech language, but those are the first off the top of my head. Music therapy is a rarer one, but absolutely can be needed or supportive for students. There is support from a BCBA or ABA support, applied behavioral analysis from a board certified behavior analyst. What am I missing, guys? There's so
There
many.
could be nursing services for students with medical needs. That could include anything from feeding, catheter changes, orientating the student to, an immobile student to prevent sores, things like that. So nursing services that a student might need. Oh, I just had another one at the top of my head that I forgot while I was saying nursing services.
Adaptive PE.
Oh,
And
communication. So an AAC and a technology to assist with communication, assistive technology devices.
we didn't mention assistive technology, but you're so right, Jay
Yes.
Natash.
Yes,
Assistive technology for
that was
accessing
right
the
online
curriculum.
with me. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, there really are a lot.
Transportation. There can be
Yes.
specialized transportation in the IEP. So an aid on the bus, if your district has taxi service with the school, that kind of thing, specialized transportation. There are so many things.
One thing to do is to reach out to an advocate like ourselves and give more information about your child's needs. And then we can speak to potential areas of support. And if you need more support than that, we can really dive in to the data that you have and help you determine if there's an area of need that's not currently being met.
So that leads us to start wrapping things up because I know we just have a couple minutes left. As a thank you for everyone joining us tonight, like Melanie said, we do offer services. We would love if any of this resonated with you, if you are thinking that you might need a little bit of assistance as you enter your new school year, please reach out and schedule a consultation. You can see here in bold on your screen, we have a discount code, KAL. BTS 25, so K Altman Law Back to School 25, to receive a discounted intake consultation as a thank you for joining our webinar tonight. On our intake consultation, you just have to mention that code again, KAL BTS 25, and that's how you'll receive that discounted intake session. But we would love to connect with you and to learn a little bit more about what's going on with your child in school, see how we might be able to help you, IEP revisions, all those kinds of things. We've seen it all. We've done it all. We've got a pretty robust set of services out here. And then this is our contact information if you would like to reach out. Again, that code was KALBTS, K Altman Law Back to School 25. And if you really, really enjoyed Sarah and Melly and I tonight, feel free to scan the QR code there to give us some feedback, to give us a Google review so that we can continue to make webinars that are actually relevant to our community and to give, good, solid information that people want to see. So I'll leave this up here until we close out in just a couple minutes, but that phone number is our main line, so you can feel free to call that. You'll be connected with our intake team that'll help you schedule a consultation, or you are welcome to email kalonline@kaltmanlaw.com to request information on how to set up a consultation via email for those who may be hearing impaired. And then if you'd like to visit us on our website or on social media, we are just at K. Altman Law on most social media, or you can just Google us. Any bilingual advocates. I did see that just pop up now, so I'll leave that up while I address it really quick. Our advocates are not bilingual, but we do have bilingual staff members that can assist in translation if that is necessary. So especially if you are looking to schedule a consult, please mention that if you are needing translation or if you are going to need translation for advocacy services, we do have team members who can translate Spanish and ASL.
And I just want to say for Mercy and Jordan Lamb, I'm just now seeing your questions in the chat, not in the Q&A. I believe we have contact information to reach out to you for an answer to those questions if we can answer, and if we can't and it's a little more individualized, then we can guide you towards a consultation. But we're not going to just leave you hanging, okay? I'm just seeing it now, so I apologize.
So sorry, I had the Q&A open, not the chat. All right, everyone. Well, that wraps us up for today. I will stay punctual. I will let you all go. We so appreciate everybody coming out tonight. And we hope that we'll be able to see you at the next one.
Thank you, everyone.